I'm just the chair. I don't do anything more important than say good morning and tell you the toilets are somewhere out there. And we're live streamed, so hello mum, just be aware if you're asking Johnny's question, my mum might be watching. Just some thanks before we start off. We've got a packed day, I'll be very brief. Many thanks to the Royal Society of Edinburgh's Voices of the Future, the RSE Young Academy of Scotland. And if you have time at the end, go and see if you can find Nasser Mir on the picture, because he doesn't appear to be there, but Nasser is the kind of brainchild of him today, so first thanks to him. Events co-sponsored between the RSE Young Academy of Scotland and the Citizens, Nations and Migration Network, CNAM, and a very, very big thanks to Alistair Hunter, who I can't see because I don't have my glasses on. Alistair did an awful lot of the organisation for today, so everything that goes well is thanks to Alistair, everything that goes wrong will be the chair's fault. And finally, I'm also representing the Association for the Study of Ethnicity and Nationalism Edinburgh branch, which is also the co-sponsor of the event. That's enough from me. I'm going to hand straight over to Nasser and we'll get started.
Perfect, wonderful. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Michael. Good afternoon, everybody. So we're here to discuss the question, is Scotland different on race and migration? And of course, it's a very big topic. How we're choosing to organise those terms matter for how we think about the topic. You know, are we talking about things like base figures? You know, how many migrants are there, quote unquote, in Scotland? How many black and ethnic minorities are there in Scotland? How does that compare with elsewhere? Well, yeah, we're interested in that. But we're also not talking about the racialisation of migration. That is to say that the ways in which migrants are characterised also spills over into how we think about the appropriate term to the new Scots, and of course vice versa, how perhaps the treatment of existing black and ethnic minorities might create certain conditions in which new groups are received. And so perhaps we're also tilting to a body of work when we're thinking about these topics, which suggests that even though the political and legal status of migrant groups and black and ethnic minority groups are profoundly different, their respective social status through markers of difference can cast both as outsiders in ways that are perhaps comparable in some respects and not comparable in others. For example, it may be the case that in some settings, Scottish and English people who are not white can have a lower social status than non-Scottish and non-English people who are. And is Scotland different to what? Its neighbours, and principally England, yes, but also different in itself to what it has been in the past, a generation ago when we were kids. So it may shock you to learn that I wasn't born and brought up in Scotland. As well as different to the myth, you know, in the sociological sense that prevails. Are we really all Jock Thompson's bairns? Can England really fall back on a notion of toleration on which it then might build? Now, if this were a research proposal, we would, of course, close off systematically some lines of inquiry to pursue others, but it's not, and we haven't. Instead, we've invited speakers who are making a distinct and original contribution on their topic to help us try and make sense of these questions instead. And as you'll see, some of this we can chart with a high degree of reliability, and especially in the use of small and large data sets. But some of this equally relies on what's not quantifiable in the same sense. So on narratives, on thick description, on stories, which add a degree of validity to our reliability. And I think we're very fortunate in having both today. So in my warm-up act, I just want to set the scene in a couple of ways. Firstly, to explore whether there are differences in mass majority attitudes to migration and race in Scotland and England. Secondly, I want to pick up on some self-reported experiences amongst black and ethnic minority groups in Scotland and set that against a UK-wide picture. And then thirdly, I want to think a little bit about political conduct, including the ways in which questions of race and immigration do or do not come together in Scotland. Now here, my title, at least on your agendas, is a little bit misleading, because in order to fit in, I think, quite an important contribution to my colleague Hannah Khan from the Cabinet Office, I've had to cut something on the policy discussion back. But at least on the topic of migration, that's covered quite expertly from our colleague Sarah Kyambi this afternoon. My only observation to make at this stage is to note that Scotland, despite the rhetoric, has largely followed the UK approach of separating issues of race equality from migration, even while I think they're both probably interlinked, including in places that I think successive Scottish governments have otherwise diverged from the UK. So while the Scottish Government has a place for race in public sector equality duties and equality outcomes and mainstreaming work, they've pretty much stuck to the UK Government's template for separating this from migration, settlement and support, even though I think they've pursued a more proactive agenda in the latter, as we learned from colleagues this afternoon. And my final preamble is to make the usual researchers complain that there are relatively few like-for-like data sources which allow for comparison here. So a degree of generosity on your part and imagination, I think, is also required. Okay, so let's start with migration. So very briefly, look, we know that Scotland has a small non-UK born share of the population, about 7% compared to 13% in England and Wales. However, we also know that the non-UK born population in Scotland in the last census increased at a higher rate in Scotland than it did in England and Wales. And the familiar story here is, London, the South East, attracts and retains more inward migration, and that's particularly clustered in certain places. And what's true of England is probably true of Scotland too, insofar as Scotland clusters in particular cities as well. Edinburgh has the largest non-UK born population in Scotland, though as a percentage of local population, and Aberdeen, is slightly higher. Now, in terms of public reported opinion on this kind of data on migration, one finding is that we shouldn't assume that there is a significant difference between Scotland and the rest of the UK, because the majority of people in both cases favour reductions to immigration. So in the Migration Observatory YouGroup survey from a few years ago, about 58% of people surveyed in Scotland supported reductions to immigration, while only about 10% favoured an increase and another 23% favoured the status quo. Furthermore, large reductions were much more popular than small reductions, with about 37% choosing reduced a lot compared with 21% who chose reduced a little. Now that said, when people are asked whether immigration is a good or a bad, attitudes are much more positive in Scotland than they are in England. Asked to respond on a scale from 0 to 10 to the question, would you say that it's generally good or bad for Scotland that people come to live here from outside the UK? In Scotland, more people place themselves on the good for the countryside of the scale than the bad for the countryside of the scale, about 50% to 32%, and 17% placing themselves on the midpoint. The most common single response in England and Wales, however, was on the extreme end of the scale, chosen by about 16% of respondents, but only about 4% chose the extreme end of the good scale. And I think in a contribution from Charles Levy-Owen, we're going to find how we can understand that against some qualitative stories, especially in Portugal, that's a bit later on. So this reading is a bit more positive than might appear from the question about just increasing or reducing migration to Scotland. And perhaps it shows that there's majority support for less immigration, yes, but that unlike England, only about a third of respondents see immigration as a bad for Scotland. Okay, so that's kind of a whistle-stop tour through some kind of attitude data on responses to migration. What about race? And so for reasons of time, I want to run through the census figures here, other than to say in England we know that about 13% of the population is black minority ethnic, and then in Scotland it's about 4%, but that doubled since the 2001 census, and it's expected to be around 10% in the next census. What I want to flag up here are majority attitudes on race, and here we can look at a couple of surveys. The first is the British Social Attitude Survey, which has this clumsy question. Would you describe yourself as prejudiced against other people? The good thing about this question is that they've been asking it consistently since 1983. And what they report is that in the 8 to the 10 years following 2001, levels of self-reported prejudice were about 30% or higher compared with the low point of about 4 to 25% in 2000. And one way to interpret that is to say that there was a falling trend during the 1990s, and then this then ticked up in the 2000s. Now, interestingly, in there you'll note that they found that Scotland has the lowest level of reported prejudice in the UK outside London. Now, one issue I find with these types of surveys is that they don't specifically ask black and ethnic minority groups about their experiences, and so that potential data is lost. This is despite researchers showing that discrimination is a concept that BME respondents are very familiar with. It's not asking people about gentrification or about social mobility. And some of the survey work I suppose I've been doing in the last couple of years focused exclusively on black and minority ethnic experiences of discrimination in Scotland. And it shows something different. So 2 surveys that I'd just like to run through quickly, one in 2015 and one in 2017. From 2015, about a third of people surveyed agreed with the statement, I've experienced discrimination in Scotland in the last 5 years, and there's a similar number in 2017 as well. It very much varied according to group and was significantly higher for some and moderately lower for others. For example, nearly 45% of respondents with a black African Caribbean heritage said that they experienced discrimination in Scotland in the last 5 years, and then again in 2017 last year. 45%, that's remarkably high, which compares with about 29% of people with Asian heritage and 23% of people with mixed heritage. Of those who reported this discrimination, or reported experiencing discrimination, or perceiving it, more than 4/5 felt it was due to their real or perceived ethnicity, and a further 42% felt it was due to their real or perceived religion. When we ask the non-personalised question, the parallel question, that figure goes up. About 35% of people agreed with the statement that discrimination is widespread in Scotland, and 42% agreed with the statement that other people would perceive discrimination to be a problem in Scotland. And where this happened wasn't located to a particular strata. People mentioned experiencing discrimination in employment, in either getting a job, around 36%, in being promoted, 31%, as well as in education, 35%, as well as the use of transport services, which is an interesting finding, but it's consistent with qualitative material out there suggesting that enclosed transport spaces are non-safe spaces. And Henry is going to come back and pick up the topic of employment in a moment. But I would just kind of show this data to suggest that if we reverse the telescope, from looking at this from the UK to Scotland perspective, we find a different story about Scottish specific experiences, perhaps less positive than UK-wide data might lead us to believe. Turning then to political actors and political conduct. Now, I think the picture is pretty clear in Scotland that in terms of the politicisation of migration, there's a kind of consensus amongst all of the political parties which are at least represented in the Scottish Parliament. They haven't made it an electoral issue, and indeed even the Tory Party manifesto at the last general election was very different in Scotland than it was in England. And perhaps that just reflects a cold hard reality of population and skill shortages. But political actors, when you speak to them, want to take more credit than that. And they sometimes claim to have actively steered the national conversation in a more inclusive direction. And here's some examples from some qualitative interviews I did with MSPs a few years ago. I think the one on the top kind of sums it up. The Scottish National Party MSP, now Minister, we've captured nationalism, we've made it something positive, it's civic. In 8 decades of work, it doesn't happen overnight. And it's kind of even though he's coming at this from a very different political perspective, the Labour MSP respondent shares something of that, without patting ourselves on the back too much, it's to the credit of the Scottish Parliament. We might add to that, political rhetoric, the ways in which, when he was First Minister, Alex Salmond would often say, Scotland is not Quebec, we in Scotland follow the path of civic nationalism. And if you have a look at the Scottish Government's white paper from 2014, actually it said a lot of things that people like me could sign up to in terms of multicultural Scottishness. And while the distinction between civic and ethnic is tricky at best, it makes sense why the SNP routinely use the words of the late Bashir Ahmed, Scotland's first ethnic minority MSP, as their signature line on this, And his statement was, it isn't important where you come from, what matters is where we are going together as a nation. We might also here highlight policy phraseology. I mentioned the white paper and the ways in which it routinely referred to not Scottish people, but all the people of Scotland. So Scottish elites are clearly kind of expressing their nationalism in a political and not ethnic or social matter, and certainly not a matter of kind of blood or soil. But is this translated into a popular consensus in terms of who gets to be Scottish? Now here's some data which is a little bit old, it's I've quoted the reference from 2010, I think the data from 2006, 2007, Ross and Michael may know the data better than I do. Surveying the attitude of majorities to claims making by minorities on nationhood in Scotland and England, our colleague David McCrone and Frank Backerfoot point to a small but consistent ethnic penalty that reveals itself marginally more in Scotland than it does in England. And they argue that Scottish in this data possibly might equate more to being white. And so what they've got going from left to right is when you ask majorities in Scotland whether or not you can be Scottish if you're not white, only 38% agree. When you add on other indicators, if you say, well, if you're not white and you have a Scottish accent, well then up to half agree. And if you say that you're not white, you have a Scottish accent, and you have Scottish parents, then that number increases significantly. But I guess what they're showing is that there's a difference between Scotland and England in terms of mass attitudes. So what should we make of that? Well, I think the disproportionately higher rejection rates towards non-whites in Scotland compared with England is concerning. The authors argue that it's important not to exceptionalise Scottish attitudes, for although they're more exclusionary than English ones, they are not radically so. And note also that the data is probably about a decade old, as I've indicated. Moreover, perhaps it also needs to be offset, with the ways in which it's often said that minorities in Scotland are more likely than their counterparts in England to appropriate hyphenated, self-defined categories. And actually, if you force minorities in Scotland to say, well, choose your national identity in Scotland, they're more likely to say Scottish than they are likely to say English in England. Now, that's kind of a well-established trend, or so we think, and political elites in their interviews and elsewhere often use it as an illustration of the way in which they've cultivated a certain kind of inclusive Scottishness. And I suppose it is interesting, isn't it? The aspect of the subjective willingness and confidence among minorities to claim Scottishness. But in important ways, I think, both Ross Bond and Emma Hill are going to problematise this reading in ways that perhaps challenges some of the prevailing cliches in this topic. So where does that leave us, and what's it tell us? Well, I think there's good news and bad news in my reading of this. Firstly, I think there is a difference between what we might call the salience of race in society and the racialisation of mainstream political conduct, and surely Scotland illustrates that. Race matters in Scotland, but it hasn't been racialised by political actors in the same way it has been in England. I do think that Scotland has more of a problem with racism than some existing UK-wide surveys would have us believe, to the extent that I actually think telling a Scottish story from a UK perspective might be misleading. In the fuller data set, there's quite a big problem of underreporting in the way in which this is negotiated in everyday life. And finally, while the political rhetoric, I think, is broadly inclusive in Scotland, there is a disconnect here between elite visions and popular opinion on this. Now, at the beginning, I said that we're struggling to find like-for-like data sets, but one of the recent initiatives by colleagues in the Cabinet Office has been to try to generate UK-wide data on this topic. Now, I'm going to hand over to Hannah, I think, who's going to run through them before.
Hello everyone, my name is Hannah. I'm Head of Strategy and Communications at the Race Disparity Unit. So I'll just cover... Oh, I'm going to go backwards.
But don't move too far.
Can I hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I just think it'd be good to cover a bit of background in relation to the website and in relation to the work that the Race Disparity Unit have been doing. So the Prime Minister launched the Race Disparity Audit on the 10th of October via the Ethnicity Facts and Figures website. Now, the website covers a wide range of data on ethnicity. Some of the data was published before, some of the data was previously unpublished, and the data highlights ethnic disparities and shows whether they're increasing or decreasing over time. Now, proportion of the data can also be viewed on these various contextual dimensions: local authority, geographic location, income, and gender. And in terms of the website's launch and coverage, it did receive a lot of coverage in terms of nationally and internationally, and a lot of people were interested in the data that had previously been unpublished. So a lot of the home ownership data, which is one of the most popular pages on the website, was highlighted through articles and various press coverage. And in terms of what the website has told us so far, well, there's over 130 different data measures. So I'm not going to say that one of the disparities is more important than the other because they all require expert attention. But the key headlines in terms of what we focused on with our key communications was that some of the examples highlight that different ethnic groups experience public services in a different way. So for example, if you are a black man, you're still more likely to be stopped and searched by the police than a white man. There is a 10 percentage point employment gap between ethnic minorities and the national average. And if you're a white working class boy, you're least likely to be going to university in comparison to the other ethnic groups. So now I'm just going to share some specific Scottish data which is available on our website, and I've compared it to other regions in the country. There. So this is an example of some of the data that's available on our website. This is employment cut by ethnicity and region. So like I mentioned earlier, where possible, we tried to cut the data by various contextual dimensions, be it gender, local authorities, or regions. And with this, I just thought it would be really interesting to look at the differences between Scotland, the North West, and London. The employment rates for all are quite similar, but if you look at the comparison between the Indian, for example, in London, it's 76%, and the white British at 78% of employed, and then compare that over to Scotland for white British 74% and Indian 69%. The differences between the percentage points for employment by ethnicity and region is actually quite different. On the surface, they are very similar in terms of numbers. Between the North West and Scotland, actually, we've got 73, 72, Indian 69, 64 between the Indian with the regions. So I just wanted to highlight this in terms of a taste of some of the data that we've got on the website that is Scotland specific. Overall, we've got 17 measures that include Scottish data. I'm more than happy to provide that to you guys in follow-up if you need it. But in terms of how we're moving forward with the unit, we've been given permission to continue as a unit for another year, and this is going to be taking forward further work focused on improving the data and increasing data published on the website, improving and increasing website functionality, and supporting departments in taking forward a series of work focused on explaining or changing the disparities. Thank you.
Okay, so next speaker is Ross Bond, and what we'll do is we'll roll the three speakers do talks rather close together, and we'll have ample opportunity for questions once we've had all three, and we can try and get a conversation going. So the next speaker, it's not that lady on the telly, it's Ross Bond.
Yeah.
This is harder than you might think.
Glad to have someone else to do it for me, come to make a mess of it myself, so thanks for that. Okay, well, thanks very much for coming along. I'm going to speak to you, as you might have gathered, about some very specific data relevant to today's theme. National identities among minorities, specifically subjective national identities. So, not the kind of data that NASA showed about what the majority in Scotland feel about whether or not non-white people perhaps should be Scottish, but whether people in these categories and others feel that themselves. But I wanted to start by just asking the question, or stating the question, does national identity matter? I mean, as someone who's been obsessed with that topic for a number of years now, I almost have to monitor myself and mention that. Because on the one hand, one might argue, yes, of course it matters, national belonging matters, it's fundamentally important. If people in minority groups in Scotland can say that they feel Scottish, then this is a clear indicator of inclusion, of belonging, of some kind of nominal equality amongst people in Scotland. But of course, It's important to differentiate between what we might call national inclusion and social inclusion. So just because we might find that people in Scotland do indeed identify predominantly as Scottish, doesn't mean to say that people in minority groups don't suffer any disadvantage that relates to that status, that minority status in social terms. On the other hand, against that, some people have argued that, especially in diverse societies, having a shared national identity, an overarching umbrella identity that people can share, is important. And equally, others have argued, including even my colleague there who I've cited in this regard, Dr. Lady Owen, that symbolic inclusion or exclusion, if you like, in terms of national identity can, we might imagine, have social consequences as well. If people don't think you have the right to belong to the nation, then that might well have implications for the way that you're treated in a social domain as well. So having said that, I want to just set up the data I'm going to talk about now by just reviewing briefly some previous evidence from Scotland and indeed from England. And looking at national identities among all people, but especially also amongst minorities, becomes more difficult, more complex in some ways in multinational states. So in states like the UK, where people can identify at different levels. They can identify at what's sometimes called the state nation level, i.e. British, or the sub-state nation level, Scottish, English, etc. And a well-known Canadian scholar, Will Kimlicka, has written about this and argued that if we have a situation where people in minority groups identify strongly at the sub-state nation level, then we have something called multinational, multicultural citizenship. And he points out that there's some evidence that suggests that this does indeed prevail in Scotland. And in that regard, he draws actually on work that was done in Scotland by Asifa Hussain and Bill Miller about a decade ago now, in which they argued that there was the existence of something called multicultural nationalism in Scotland. And their work, in fact, is one of the few studies to focus on a fairly large sample of a particular minority group in Scotland, of people of Pakistani origin in Scotland. And as well as surveying quite a few hundred of these people, they also did work with them in terms of focus groups, interviews, etc. As well. And the essential conclusion that people in that minority group did identify quite strongly as Scottish on the whole has also been backed up by quite a few other studies, smaller scale studies done in Scotland over the years. So going back to the very end of the 20th century, Saeed and his colleagues with work among young teenagers in Glasgow. More recently, Satnam Verde and his colleagues, again in Glasgow, looking at the south side of Glasgow, a particular neighbourhood and identities among minorities there. Peter Hopkins' work with young Muslims in Edinburgh and Glasgow, and also Stefano Bonino, his work on Muslims in Edinburgh, and that's a more recently published book on that very subject has just come out as well. Contrast this with England, which I'm not going to say too much about in this qualitative domain, because I know that Charlie's going to talk about that, but a lot of evidence in small-scale studies in England that English identity, on the other hand, as opposed to Scottish identity, is quite ethnicised. And this has been summed up by this quote from Fenton and Mann here, who say that with respect to the distinction between Englishness and Britishness, whiteness appears important. So what's been found by a lot of research in England is not that people in minority groups are somehow isolated, divorced from identifying with the nation, but they tend to identify as British. They tend to identify at that state nation level rather than the sub-state nation. So where does the 2011 census come in? Well, it comes in because despite all these findings, actually being able to find and do kind of robust comparison between Scotland and other parts of the UK, more specifically England, has been quite difficult. And there's a number of reasons for that, but mainly because when we do social surveys in Scotland, because of the much lower proportions of people in minority groups in Scotland. We just have very few numbers of people to go on. So to give just one example, a typical survey in Scotland, the Scottish Social Attitude Survey, well regarded, excellent survey, only works with a sample of about 1,500 people each year. In that sample, you typically only get around 60 or 70 people in minority ethnic groups. And maybe even in the largest minority ethnic group in Scotland, Pakistanis, you might only get 12 or 15 people. So not really big enough subsample sizes for any kind of robust analysis of these specific groups. As we've also seen, a lot of the very valuable and excellent research that's been done in Scotland has looked often at that largest group, at Pakistani Muslims, and has often been done in places like Glasgow and Edinburgh. Quite understandably, but again, in terms of getting an overall sense of what's going on at a national level across all areas and all groups, we haven't had anything robust to go on at all. So the census comes in here in that for the very first time, at the last census in 2011, a question on national identity was asked. This had never been done before, but it did follow a bit of a trend in terms of a move towards what we might call more subjective questions in the census. So not just asking you about your occupation, whether you own a car, whether you have central heating, etc., but asking people about ethnicity, which was first done in 1991, religion, first done in 2001, with the exception of Northern Ireland, where it's been done every census since partition, and then in 2011, this question on national identity. And this is the question as it was asked in Scotland. What do you feel is your national identity? And people were given a number of explicit options, Scottish, English, Welsh, etc., British, or also given the option of writing in their own identity if they didn't feel they belonged to any of these predefined groups. Now, this has some methodological limitations. Clearly, any kind of survey type question trying to get at people's national identity in a general sense is not perfect. It has some limitations in that regard. But it does have a huge advantage in terms of scale and coverage and enabling us to get sufficient numbers in these various minority groups to do some quite robust analysis. And we're also able to relate the responses we get on national identities to some of these other subjective questions that we've looked at, or that I've mentioned already, like religion, ethnicity, and also other important variables like people's country of birth, or if they weren't born in the UK, how long have they been living here, and things like that. Now, National Records Scotland, through the Scotland Census website, which is up there, do publish an awful lot of really great aggregate data from the census, which is really useful, and I urge you, if you're interested, to go and use it. But again, this does have some limitations. It limits us a bit in doing more complex analysis because the data is just presented to you as is. It's not really there for you to manipulate and perhaps create your own variables or just look at specific subsets of cases other than at various geographical levels. And another limitation to me, which is quite important with regard to national identity, is the census data, aggregate data on national identity, includes people of all ages. So whether you're 1 year old or 99 years old, there will be a national identity for you. Now, to me, that is somewhat problematic. Regardless of your views about the agency of children and research and things like that, which is a very long and complex debate, the idea to me that someone who's maybe 2 or 3 years old could subjectively decide and verbalise their own national identity is problematic. So that's another issue with the aggregate data. And what I've tried to do in data I'm about to show you now is address these limitations. Firstly, by doing some more complex analysis, but also only by including adult cases in the analysis. So all the data I'm going to show you is only for people aged 16 years or over. Now, what I've done then is used what's a 5% sample of the census data, what's usually called the census microdata. This is provided by the UK Data Service. It's exactly the same as any other census data, but it's just a sample of it which researchers can then use like any other survey data and manipulate it, change it, play around with it to their own ends. What I've also done is I've grouped the various categories into what I'm calling ethno-religious categories. So for some groups in Scotland and indeed the UK, we don't learn much more in knowing their religion than what we knew if we knew their ethnicity. So the vast majority of people who describe themselves as Pakistani, for example, also describe themselves as Muslim. On the other hand, in other ethnic groups, for example Indian, that's not the case. And other researchers as well have used these same ethno-religious categories. So another reason for me employing them is for comparative purposes as well. So what are we looking for in the analysis? We're looking for any evidence of what Pimlica's called multinational, multicultural citizenship, or what Hussein and Miller called multicultural nationalism. To what extent the people in Scotland, and especially people in minority groups, identify as Scottish or British or what. And to address the big question, today's big question, is Scotland different? Obviously we need something to compare it to. And in this regard, in my presentation, the comparator, as it often is, as I'm sure you're aware, is England. So is Scotland different from England? Okay. So I'm going to show you now a number of tables. I should emphasise here, in the actual analysis, there's something like 17 different groups. It's a challenge to show you quantitative data that's reasonably clear and gives you a clear message without bombarding you with data and without doing something that I hate when people show massively complex tables in tiny little letters that you can't even read. So what I've done is just pulled out some of the main minority groups in Scotland to compare with what we might call the white majority, people who identify as white Scottish or white British or white English, etc. And within this sample of the census data, these are the overall numbers that we're dealing with, and I've also put the England numbers as well. So you can see overall we're still dealing with more than 200,000 cases. We're dealing with more than 1,500 people in the Pakistani Muslim category, which, as I've already said, is massively greater than you get in any survey. But on the other hand, for some of the other groups, we are getting, for Arab Muslims, for example, there's only 237 cases. So that's worth bearing in mind. These do become data that do have a margin for error involved as well. So the first part of the analysis I'm actually showing is just this question of to what degree do people in these various groups in Scotland identify as Scottish or as British. These are the only two things I'm focusing on, identification as Scottish and British. And you can see here, the reason I've put the top and the bottom row in red is that these are the only two groups where identification as Scottish is actually higher than identification as British. And if you're wondering why they don't add up to 100, the reason also is that people could pick as many identities as they liked in the survey, in the census. So they could say, yes, I feel Scottish, but also British, or indeed something else. Now, you can see that in the case of the white majority, if you like, that's a massive differential. People overwhelmingly identify much more as Scottish than they do as British. For people in mixed ethnic groups, people who decide that their ethnicity is mixed or multiple, that's also the case, but there's a much smaller differential between these two. And then in all the other groups, the opposite is the case. In fact, people are more likely to say that they're British than they are to say that they're Scottish. Also, there's a lot of variety between these groups. So the biggest, largest minority group in Scotland, Pakistani Muslims, coming on for half of people in that group say they're Scottish. On the other hand, for example, people who are Chinese and also have no religion, or people who are African Christians, quite small minorities only in these groups identify. Now that might not only be related to the ethnic group they come from, of course, it could be related to other things like where they were born. And that's something I'm going to take into account later. Turn now to England, so exactly the same kind of data at this time for England, and again I've highlighted the top and bottom rows because we find exactly the same in terms of overall pattern. It's only in these two groups that people are much more likely to identify at sub-state level compared to as British. And again, in the mixed group, the differential is much smaller than white majority. But this time it's quite interesting, especially when we focus on the differential between English and British identities. These differentials are much larger, much smaller minorities of people, as Nasser suggested earlier, might be the case in England, and minority ethnic groups feel able to describe themselves as English, but on the other hand, larger proportions of them typically feel able to describe themselves as British. And to make that a bit easier now for you to take in, I'm just showing you exactly the same data, but I'm showing Scotland and England side by side for percentage identification as Scottish in Scotland or as English in England. And there, this time, the categories I've highlighted are the ones where the differentials are really quite big. So in the Pakistani Muslim, Arab Muslim, and Indian or other Asian Sikh groups, you're about 3 times as likely, if you live in Scotland, to say you feel Scottish as to say you feel English if you live in England. And in all the other groups as well, you can see that people in Scotland are more likely to identify at that sub-state level, albeit the differentials aren't quite so big. And then again, similarly for British identification, this time I haven't highlighted anything in red. The differentials on the whole tend to be smaller, but we can see that consistently people in minority groups in England are more likely to identify as British than they are in Scotland. But remembering that they're still quite likely to identify as British if they live in Scotland. So it's not like we're saying minorities in Scotland don't feel British, they feel Scottish, and the opposite's true in England. The difference is one of degree, not a polarised contrast. Finally, I'm going to show you something that tries to represent more complex analysis, which tries to take into account factors that we might think are important, like people's place of birth, if they're not born in the UK, how long they've lived in the UK, and other factors, social class, and also their linguistic capacity in things like Scots and Gaelic, which was also assessed in the census. Now, these are odds ratios. Now, the simplest way to understand these is we're comparing to another group. The first column compares to the white majority. And if these figures were 1, we would be saying that the chances of people in that group identifying as Scottish, taking all these other factors into consideration, all the other things being equal, would be 1. 1.0. The further we get below 1, the less likely people are in those groups to identify as Scottish compared with the majority, taking the birthplace and migration status, etc. into account. So here you can see a couple of things. First of all, compared to the white majority, even once we take birthplace, etc. into account, people in minority groups in Scotland are generally a good bit less likely to identify as Scottish. It's not just related to where they were born, things like that. You can also see variety within again, across these groups. So Pakistani Muslims are more likely than some other groups relative to the white majority to identify as Scottish, but not as likely as others. So it's not that they are a typical group necessarily, even though a lot of research has focused on them understandably. The second column takes all the white majority out of the analysis, it ignores them completely, and compares the other minorities to the largest minority group, Pakistani Muslims. And that confirms that some groups seem to be more likely than them to identify as Scottish, although the ones that I've asterisked are the areas where, because of the subsample sizes, we get to a situation where we don't have what we would call a statistically significant difference necessarily. But you can see there that, again, people in mixed ethnic groups are significantly more likely to identify as Scottish compared to Pakistani Muslims. But on the other hand, people who are Indian Hindus, for example, or Chinese people with no religion, less likely. Okay. So, I'm just about out of time, but what can we conclude from all this? Is Scotland different? Question mark. A typical social scientific answer, yes, but. So, the yes bit, clearly there is greater sub-state identification in Scotland, greater identification as Scottish among minority groups in Scotland compared to their counterparts in England, identification as English. So there is more apparent evidence of what we might call multicultural nationalism in Scotland compared to England and indeed Wales. So in the work that I did and I published, I also compared it with Wales. I've not shown that data today to keep things simple, but indeed Wales, if anything, maybe leans more towards the England model than the Scottish one, albeit somewhere in between. And then the but. We can also see that British identification is very prominent in Scotland. For a lot of minority ethnic groups, it's more prominent than Scottishness. There's also some evidence that it's easier to become British, if you like. So people who weren't born in the UK but have lived here for a longer time seem more able to become British than become Scottish. Britishness has this, perhaps, this transnational quality, some people describe it as, which enables that. We've also seen that people with minority groups, even when we take other factors into consideration, are less likely to identify as Scottish than those in the white majority. And we've also seen that Pakistani Muslims might not necessarily be a typical group in Scotland. They're not, obviously, an atypical group either, at the extreme, but we need to think that we shouldn't always be taking them to represent minorities as a whole. The next question is, why is Scotland different? Some of the reasons for that have been touched on already. I suspect and expect that others will be touched on as we go on, and we can also discuss them in the Q&A as well, if you like. So I'll leave that for now, because I'm out of time, and we can maybe talk about these things later.